We know that creating a positive customer experience is critical to a successful software implementation. According to a recent survey by Salesforce, 80% of customers surveyed say that the experience a company provides is equally as important as their services. With our partners at CTR Maine, this episode of Breadcrumbs explores insights and lessons we've learned helping our customers succeed for the long haul. Hello, and welcome to Breadcrumbs, the podcast by WorkSync. Today, we'll be learning how to support your clients as they travel through the customer journey. I'm joined today by our friends at CTR Maine, Pete Clark, Senior Implementer, and Amy Kudej, VP of Operations. Welcome.
Hello.
Thanks for having me, Kim.
All right, so let's talk about client success. First, let's set the playing field. What is your approach to client success? Amy, maybe you can kick us off.
Well, I think for us at CTR Maine, the client success starts at the very beginning with sales and making sure that a client knows what they're getting. We don't oversell the software. We don't tell them they're going to get something that we cannot deliver. I think that's an important thing for us. We would rather say, I'm sorry, we are not a good fit, as opposed to overselling the product and then being unable to meet the client's needs. And I think that's probably where we start. And one of the things that our sales do is they consult with our implementation regarding client questions and custom requests with regards to the software to make sure that we can meet the needs of the client, especially if they have something outside the box that they want. And I think that's kind of where we start with this. And then it rolls through implementation follow-up and support, and continually supporting the client, but making sure that we begin that relationship with the client and then continue it and have it be an actual relationship, as opposed to we're somebody that's behind a computer somewhere, making sure they're people, we're people, and we're there to help them and to service them. And that's really the start of our journey and our mindset with regards to it. And Pete, you can add in there?
No, absolutely. I agree fully with that. And I think it also comes down to partnering with them, being on their side of the table rather than across from them, and just sort of showing them, okay, this is what we can and can't do, which we certainly need to do, but also showing them that we're on their team and we want things to be successful from their point of view, not from our own point of view. So we have to gain their point of view to know what is actually going to work for them, and then we have to creatively make that work within the system. So really, that's the biggest piece I take into implementation, is how can I learn what's not only just important to them, but their approach to it, so that I can mirror that and be a team player with them rather than part of their team. I want it to feel like I'm a part of your organization working for you, with you. I'm not another company that you're calling. Almost like you've hired me and I'm your employee now, and I'm going to work with you and help you.
So, Amy, you mentioned mindset when you were talking about client success, and Pete, you gave really good examples of that. Can you elaborate a little bit further? What is your mindset when you begin this? What differentiates a client success person versus somebody who's just trying to get the software off the ground?
I think building on what Pete said, but at CTR Maine, our whole thing is customer support. And that's a word that a lot of people say. They have great customer support, but part of that is backing it up. And we do back that up. How do we make this work for them in the best possible way? Because what's great about the software and the implementation is that it is very flexible. You can do the same thing in multiple ways, just like you can punch in multiple ways. But what works best for that client and really how do we get it to them in a way that they're comfortable, they're happy, we respond to them on time. And that it seems like such a small thing, but it's a big thing. We help follow up with them with other companies that we may be integrating with, say a payroll company or an HR company that we're working with. We always make sure to keep them in the loop and help them with that. If they need a new report, things like that, that's kind of not your standard report, we're happy to create a custom work for them. Just different things to make sure that they're happy and that they feel like they're being listened to. I think that's the biggest thing is clients want to be listened to. They want to be heard, just like we all do. And I think that that's an important part of that mindset and process.
So Amy, you talked a lot about mindset, listening to ensure success. So let's talk about success. So Pete, how do you ensure that success? What are the things that you do or the software can do that can ensure that the customer is successful? And also, what if they're unhappy? How do you deal with these kinds of challenges? Because I know that everyone listening here have frustrations before. So I want to understand if there's a way that you can address that successfully.
Yeah. So I guess it comes down to what the issues are. Probably the issue that you can't really get through is more personal, relationship-based issues, where if you're not jiving with someone or they're not, there's an antagonism there, which I've seen happen from time to time within companies that we're working with. One department is antagonistic towards another department. So I've had, in some certain circumstances, had to play the peacemaker, even between departments. And that can go a long way to bolstering confidence among upper leadership of a company. If I'm willing to work with two departments and work with the company to sort things out between those departments, that just shows them that I'm not stepping away or not kind of stepping back saying, not my job. That's probably one of the biggest things is, especially nowadays, it's pretty easy for folks to say, well, that's not my job, not my thing. And it may not be, but that's where companies are really keen on, okay, that's status quo, is someone saying, not my job, not my thing. But being able to step in and say, okay, it's not my job, but I want to help. I want to be here to facilitate and to help. So those are usually the biggest conflicts to get through. Well, the way I define success is probably different than I think a salesperson would define success as far as selling a lot of product or doing a lot of things like that. My success is if someone is even going to end up leaving or not going with the software, if when they do that, they say, we regret having to do this because we got along so well with the implementations team. The customer service was fantastic. Everything went well, and we really regret having to do this. If someone regrets leaving for whatever reason, because people do leave for whatever reason, and not every project is going to be 100% successful. But if that is always there, that they have a pain of regret from leaving because everything went so smoothly, except for whatever unforeseen circumstances happen, that sort of is where I'm always gauging success, is how well companies are able to work with us. And part of that is that we basically our knowledge of the product is not specialized, meaning there's not one department that handles one aspect of the product and another department that handles another aspect. So it's not as fragmented. We're able to have at least a basic knowledge of all items. And then having been in the industry and been with the product so long, we're able to really provide expertise on almost every level of the product. So they're not having to wait to get an answer from someone from another department. And it's not as fragmented as just having one project manager that then oversees other people. The less people that are involved from our side, the smoother it's generally going to be. And that's not a knock on having teams of people. It's just the nature of the way things are. It's easier to have somebody answer all these questions at once rather than have to wait for other departments to get involved.
Jumping on what you just said, Pete, Amy, can you talk a little bit more about the people aspect versus the technology aspect of starting a project. How does that affect your success with implementation?
As Pete said, personalities are a really important thing. Our implementers are okay with stepping back and giving a project to another implementer because their personalities might clash with the person. And it might have nothing to do with the fact that the voice reminds somebody of somebody they knew back in high school, or whatever it might be. I think that it's important to know that we not only try to fit the personalities with that. So you have to look at the personalities, you have to get into that. But part of that is really just, I think for us, is breaking down our implementation into stages and making sure that we start with we know what we're doing, we're going to set you up. We're not going to try and throw everything at you all at once, especially with a product like WorkSync, which is a multifaceted and complex system, especially when you add in that scheduling piece. We want to make sure you get your time and attendance right first. Then we'll move on to your scheduling. Are you happy here? Do we need to make adjustments afterward? And I think that's another important thing that we try to do is sometimes a client might say, this is the way I want this. And then they're using it and they come back and they go, oh, that's not really working the way I thought it would work. So we're happy to go back and say, is this working for you? Is it not working for you? Would you like to change it slightly? And really not to say, oh, well, I'm done because I've done my implementation. We're moving on. I do something else. And part of that is working with the people and developing that client relationship.
So CTR Maine has been doing this kind of project work, customer first work, for years. So tell me, over the years, what are some lessons you've learned? Any interesting implementations or processes that you've tried and maybe didn't work, or ones that are just awesome and are successful all the time?
Yeah. Well, I think, so probably a good place to start would be the fairly recent implementation that we did, where everything worked very smoothly, almost surprisingly smoothly, because it was such a large company and there was a lot of hands involved. But there was a great deal of preparation beforehand from the customer. And what I've found or learned is implementations do certainly go a lot smoother when the customer is fully prepared. And that may take longer than we would like, but it's generally better from my perspective to have them have had the preliminary meetings, know exactly what they need to have for information for me before starting it. And so there have been several implementations where everything was very fragmented in the company. They had to pull meetings together. And we actually stopped the implementation process cold and said, let's just revisit this in 3 months. I gave them all the information that I would need, and they would discuss it. And they came back a few months later and said, here they had all their ducks in a row. Everything was ready to go. And we went through the process, and it was much more smooth than trying to get little pieces of information at a time. Those implementations usually get dragged out much, much longer than if we had taken a break and revisited it than doing something like that. So that's one thing I've found is also to, as much as possible, get the customer to understand that there needs to be one person. An implementation that goes well usually has one key person who is going to own the project, be involved from start to finish, and be my go-to person as the implementer. If I don't have that, or I have many different people that I need to keep involved and many different things to juggle, it just makes it needlessly complicated. So having that one person is very, very key. And someone who also knows the ins and outs of the company, which unfortunately these days is more and more rare. But the people that I've worked with where they've been with their company for years, they know why they're doing certain things and they know how they're doing certain things. They're able to give much more insight and help the implementation process be successful from that standpoint.
Yeah. What Pete brings up is very important. You really need on the end of the client, and this is something that's helpful when you first are talking to them, you need them to have a cheerleader or someone who's responsible to get that system set up on their end. If you go into a setup where the person that you're working with doesn't really want to use your software, like maybe they use something else in their previous life or whatever, it can be a little bit rough. You need to make sure that you have somebody that the upper management is saying, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to be using, and really say, let's go forward and use it. They can't be reticent with regards to setting up the software. We especially found that with the visual scheduling aspect of the software, that there really needs to be, as Pete said, one person who's kind of the product or project manager on their end that you can go to and work with, because there's always going to be a manager that doesn't like to do things a different way than they've always done it in the past. I like my Excel spreadsheets, and that's good for me. And if the management says, oh, okay, that's fine, then it's not going to be a successful implementation. There has to be some backing on their end to implement a system, whether it be any kind of software, because it's really, the software is part of the solution. It is not the solution. I mean, we can't program human behavior in our software. So we really need to make sure that the client wants to and knows that they need to be an advocate for this implementation or collaboration, because it's really a collaboration with us and them to make sure that their time and attendance is correct, that their policies are being followed, that their employees are able to punch and do what they need to do, and that their management is happy with the outcome of this implementation.
We're going to jump into the rest of the customer's life cycle after implementations. Let's talk about touch points with your customers. What are some of the best practice that you've put into place for customer communications?
Well, one of the things that we try to do is after an implementation is, we usually have that first payroll cycle, but then you want to check in with them again. Usually the second payroll cycle, you'll kind of jump in, do you want me there? That kind of thing. Sometimes they'll say, no, I'm good. Other times they'll say, it would be helpful if I was there for the second payroll. Checking in with them probably around 3 months, saying, are you happy with this? I think one of the key things is our customer support work with the implementation group. So it's a small group, and actually the implementation specialists are the leaders of the support staff. So when it's a new implementation and the support staff gets a call, they might just send it right over to Pete because it was his client, and it helps him get an idea of where that is. And I think that's kind of a thing. People go into support, but they're never really out of implementation, I would say, because, next year they might change their accruals. And so they need to change that. Companies are organic, they're growing, they change, they contract. And especially with COVID, they had to change the way they worked. A lot of people were working from home, so we had to go in and help them change. Maybe they're not punching in at clocks anymore. And that's technically implementation. So I think that the key thing is that it's really an ongoing process, and it never really ends. And if you treat it as if it ends, then I think that that's where you start losing the customer.
That's a good point. Owning mistakes, probably a big one. We're going to make them. I'm usually upfront with people in the implementation process and even afterwards that, I may make a mistake, but what we try to do to mitigate those mistakes is have as many people competent enough with the product that they can double check me. And I'm always double checking with my colleague if somebody in support is helping a customer that's been with us for a long time and they're running into an issue. We're a team, we're collaborating, we're working together to solve the issues. It's not just one person. We usually just say, try to check our egos at the door and just say, look, the end goal is to get a solution for someone, and try to be as upfront and honest about that.
So, what advice would you give our listeners when they are questioning time and attendance providers when it comes to their customer success practices? What should they look for?
It's a good question.
Yeah, I think they should look at the company and ask themselves, are these people here to support me? Or do they see me as a number? Do they put me in a box? Or are they going to look for the best solutions for me? And are they going to steer me to what I need? Or are they going to try and sell me all the extras that I don't need? Or maybe I do need, but they will, and it might not be in the best interest of the company that they're looking at to say, yeah, you really only need this basic package. I'm not going to sell you the Cadillac when you need the Kia. Or I'm going to point you in a direction that you really need based on what your company needs are. And I think that that's an important thing for them to look at. We're not selling the software. We are CTR Maine, and we are selling what we think is best for you. It's more of a solutions as opposed to a software, just one specific thing provider. We're going to help you and solve your problems as best we can. So, that's what I would look for. That's what I look for when I look for different things too. When you go out and about, are you going to go to the floral store where they have like this one thing that everybody buys? Or are you going to go to the one that's going to say, oh yeah, I know you like these, so I'm going to put this together for you. I think it's just the same in everyday life. You want to be noticed as a person, and the client wants to be noticed as an individual company, not just another X, Y, and Z.
What about you, Pete? Any advice for our listeners?
Yeah, I would just say it sounds counterintuitive, but to ask what are the weaknesses of the software? Because if I'm asked that question as an implementation person and I'm able to give competent answers and honest, transparent answers saying, well, it's not really great at doing this or that, then it really would give them the confidence that they know we already know what the limitations are, and therefore we know how to overcome those. So that would be one pretty important question I would ask any new software if I was setting it up, what the limitations are, and how they overcome those limitations.
Yeah, if they say there aren't any, that's a big, big red flag.
Exactly.
Wonderful. Well, Amy, Pete, thank you so much for joining me today. I think this was really insightful. I love hearing about your lessons learned and experiences in the field. Pete, Amy, thank you for joining me on this episode of Breadcrumbs.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.